Listen closely, for the history, is but a fragile veneer, a gilded frame around a canvas painted in shadows and blood. We are taught that the great dynasties of Europe, the names that echo through our halls of power and our museums of art, rose through divine right, political genius, and mercantile fortune. But what if that were only half the truth? What if, hidden within the vaults of the Vatican, secreted away in the private chapels of Florentine palaces, there lies evidence of a far darker, more terrifying source of their influence? Tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain on one of history's most explosive and suppressed secrets. The story you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. It is a tale of ambition that defied God, of a bargain struck in the dead of night, and a price that would be paid in blood for generations. This is the shocking disclosure of how the Medici family, the architects of the Renaissance, made a pact with the devil for power. If you dare to uncover the truths that history tried to bury, subscribe to History One and ensure you do not miss a single revelation. Now let us begin our descent. The year is 1429. The city of Florence is a crucible of intrigue, art, and violence. Banking families vie for control, their fortunes as volatile as the Tuscan sun is bright. In a dimly lit chamber deep within the Palazzo Medici, a young man named Cosimo de' Medici kneels not in prayer, but in desperation. His father, Giovanni, the family patriarch who built their banking empire, lies on his deathbed. The rivals circle like vultures, the Albizzi, the Strozzi, all waiting for the moment the Medici falter. Cosimo feels the weight of a dynasty on his shoulders, a weight that threatens to crush him into obscurity. He has the mind of a financier, but his enemies have the hearts of wolves. In this moment of profound vulnerability, a visitor arrives. He is not announced by the servants. He simply appears. A man of unassuming dress, yet with eyes that hold the coldness of ancient stone. He calls himself Silvano, a scholar from the East, but his knowledge is not of books, but of the human soul's deepest desires. He speaks to Cosimo of destiny, not as a path to be walked, but as a force to be seized. He whispers of a future where the name Medici is not just respected, but feared, not just wealthy, but synonymous with power itself. He offers a solution, a transaction more profound than any loan or bond. All it requires is Cosimo's consent, a signature not in ink, but in will. That night, as a storm rages over Florence, mirroring the tempest in Cosimo's soul, a choice is made. The foundation of the Renaissance was not laid with marble alone, but with a promise whispered in the dark, a promise that would bind the fate of the Medici to something far older and far more terrible than they could possibly imagine. The transformation was as swift as it was shocking. Within a year, Cosimo de' Medici, once seen as a mere banker, became the uncrowned king of Florence. His rivals found their fortunes mysteriously collapsing. Business deals evaporated. Ships laden with their goods were lost at sea. The Albizzi family, his most powerful opponents, were suddenly and conveniently implicated in a conspiracy against the state, leading to their exile. Cosimo's political ascent was not a climb. It was an anointment by an invisible hand. But his power was not merely political. It was as if a dark muse had descended upon the city. Cosimo began to pour unimaginable wealth into art and architecture, funding artists like Donatello and Brunelleschi. Yet, those with a discerning eye might have noticed something unsettling in the masterpieces he commissioned. In the serene faces of Madonnas, There was sometimes a shadow in the smile, a knowing glint in the eye that spoke of secrets older than Christianity. The magnificent dome of the Florence Cathedral, Brunelleschi's marvel, was more than an architectural feat. Its very design, a series of interlocking ribs, was said by some occult scholars to mirror a celestial prison, or perhaps a gateway. Cosimo surrounded himself with philosophers like Marsilio Ficino, who were tasked with translating ancient Hermetic texts, works of magic and esoteric wisdom long suppressed by the Church. This was not merely the pursuit of knowledge, it was the gathering of tools. The Florentine Renaissance, therefore, was not just a rebirth of classical learning. It was a calculated infusion of pagan and arcane power into the heart of Christendom, orchestrated by a man who had been given the keys to a kingdom far greater than Florence. For 3 generations, the Medici flourished, their Pact a shadowy heirloom. Then came Lorenzo, later called Il Magnifico. He was the zenith, the perfect fusion of human potential and diabolical favor. His court was the most brilliant in Europe, a constellation of talent that included a young, tempestuous artist named Michelangelo and the firebrand preacher, Girolamo Savonarola. Lorenzo understood the bargain better than his predecessors. He knew the power did not come without a constant, gruesome tithe. The dark patron required sustenance. It fed on chaos, on passion, on death. The infamous Pazzi conspiracy of 1478, where Lorenzo was attacked during High Mass in the Duomo, his brother Giuliano brutally murdered beside him, was not merely a political assassination attempt. For those who know the true story, it was a ritual. The conspiracy itself was allowed to fester, its players manipulated like puppets by Lorenzo's shadowy advisors. The chosen location, a cathedral, and the timing, during the elevation of the host, were a deliberate sacrilege, a perversion of the holy that generated a wave of spiritual energy upon which his dark benefactor feasted. Lorenzo's survival and his subsequent bloody vengeance were not just the actions of a statesman securing his power. They were the final act of the ritual, a sacrifice of his enemies on the altar of his ambition. The blood that stained the cathedral floor that day sealed his power more firmly than any treaty. But in the aftermath, a new voice rose in Florence, one that seemed immune to the Medici's charm and terror. The voice of Savonarola, who railed against their corruption and the city's sin. He was the first crack in the foundation, a man whose power came from a source the Medici had long since forsaken. The death of Lorenzo the Magnificent in 1492 was accompanied by omens that shook all of Italy. The Duomo's great dome was struck by lightning on the night he fell ill. Wolves were heard howling within the city walls. It was as if the very fabric of reality, strained by decades of infernal influence, was finally tearing. With Lorenzo's steadying hand gone, the balance was lost. The devout, long suppressed by Medici wealth and fear, flocked to Savonarola. He led the infamous bonfire of the vanities, burning paintings, books, and finery, a direct assault on the sensual, pagan-infused culture the Medici had cultivated. This was a spiritual war, and for a time, it seemed the Dominican friar would win. The Medici were exiled, but the pact was not so easily broken. The family's dark patron did not abandon its investments. In exile, the Medici plotted not just with armies and gold, but with darker arts. Savonarola's downfall, his arrest, torture, and execution at the stake in 1498, was a masterclass in demonic realpolitik. His confession was extracted under duress, so horrific it broke the spirit of his followers. His public burning was more than an execution. It was a counter-ritual, a brutal demonstration of what happened to those who challenged the true power behind the scarlet cloak of Florence. The Medici returned, not as mere merchants, but as dukes, their power now hardened, militarized, and more ruthless than ever. The message was clear. Even the voice of God himself could be silenced. The 16th century saw the Medici ambition spill beyond the borders of Florence, reaching for the ultimate seat of power, the Papacy itself. In 1513, Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X. It was the ultimate sacrilege, the ultimate joke on Christendom. The story goes that he said, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." The comment takes on a far more sinister meaning in light of the family's secret history. Here was a pope, the vicar of Christ on earth, whose family owed its position to a power that denied Christ. Under Leo X, the Vatican became a theater of decadence, while the shadowy influence of the Medici Pact infiltrated the highest levels of the Church. It was Leo who excommunicated Martin Luther, sparking the Protestant Reformation. Was this merely a doctrinal dispute? Or was it a calculated move by the infernal power behind the Medici to shatter the unity of Christianity, creating chaos and conflict on a continental scale? A feast for an entity that thrived on such energy? The Medici had not just infiltrated the Church, they were using it to tear the world apart. Their influence created a schism that would drown Europe in blood for over a century, all while they continued to prosper, placing a second Medici, Clement VII, on the papal throne. But such audacity would not go unanswered. The sack of Rome in 1527 by the mutinous troops of Charles V was seen by contemporaries as an act of divine punishment. For us, it was a warning, a violent tremor from a heaven that had been profoundly insulted. While the male line orchestrated politics and religion, the women of the Medici family often served as the keepers of the dark flame. None more so than Catherine de' Medici, who was shipped to France as a teenage bride to the future King Henry II. Orphaned and seen as a mere merchant's daughter, she was despised at the French court. But Catherine arrived with more than just dowry chests. She brought her family's secret with her, hidden in her books, her perfumes, and her advisors. It was Catherine who introduced the decadent and occult-influenced Italian Renaissance to the French court. She became known for her flying squadron of beautiful ladies-in-waiting, used to seduce and spy on courtiers, a practice some whispered was a form of sexual magic to control the king and his nobles. Her personal symbol, the mountain peak, was a direct nod to the alchemical quest for transformation, for turning base metal into gold, obscurity into supremacy. When her husband died, leaving her as the power behind the throne for her 3 weak sons, her methods grew darker. The French wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants provided the perfect chaos. And in that chaos, Catherine saw an opportunity not just for political control, but for a grand ritual that would secure her family's power in France for centuries. That ritual would culminate in one of the most infamous nights in history, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The air in Paris during the summer of 1572 was thick with tension and the cloying scent of deception. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen Mother, presented a face of reconciliation. She arranged the marriage of her daughter, Marguerite, to the Protestant King Henry of Navarre, a union meant to bridge the bloody chasm between Catholics and Huguenots. Protestant nobles from across France flooded into the Catholic city for the wedding. But this was no peace offering. It was bait. The wedding celebrations were a spectacle of Medici extravagance, a dizzying whirl of feasts and masquerades designed to lull the intended victims into a false sense of security. In the shadows, Catherine consulted with her astrologers, notably the renowned Nostradamus, who had long been a client of the Medici. They were not just reading the stars, they were calculating the most auspicious moment for an offering of blood. The tolling of the church bell at dawn on August 24th, the feast of St. Bartholomew, was not a call to prayer, but a signal to slaughter. For days, the streets of Paris ran red. Thousands of Protestants were dragged from their homes and murdered. The chaos was not a bug, it was a feature. The massacre was a symphony of death orchestrated by Catherine, a vast sacrificial rite performed on the altar of Paris itself. The psychic energy released by such concentrated betrayal, terror, and religious fervor was immense. It was a feast for the dark force that accompanied her, a renewal of the ancient pact on a scale that would have made Cosimo shudder. In the aftermath, Catherine's grip on France was absolute, but the stench of blood and sulfur would never leave her name. Back in Florence, the Medici were now Grand Dukes, their power absolute. But the weight of their centuries-old bargain was beginning to manifest in a horrifying new way, in their own bloodline. The later Medici heirs were often strange. They were prone to fits of madness, debilitating depression, and physical infirmity. Ferdinando II hid from public view, his body racked with unknown ailments. Cosimo III's reign was a parade of bigotry and paranoia. His son, the last Medici Grand Duke, Gian Gaston, was a notorious debauchee who lay in bed for days, surrounded by sycophants and vice. This was not merely the result of inbreeding, as historians often suggest. This was the rot of the soul, the genetic echo of a demonic transaction. The initial power had been glorious, but the compound interest of damnation was now due. The family line was like a guttering candle, its flame choked by the very darkness that had once fueled it. Their art, once vibrant with hidden meaning, became morbid and grotesque. Their palaces, once centers of light and learning, felt like mausoleums. The entity that had granted them power was now consuming them from the inside, leaving behind hollowed-out shells of men. Proof that the devil, in the end, always collects his due. As the 18th century dawned, the Medici line was dying. The final chapter belonged to Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici, the last of her name. A pious, intelligent woman, she was tragically aware of the curse that clung to her family. She had been married off to the Elector Palatine in Germany, a union that produced no heirs, as if the very universe was refusing to let the tainted bloodline continue. Widowed, she returned to Florence, a city now quiet under the shadow of its fading rulers. She watched her brother, Gian Gaston, decay into irrelevance and death, and she was faced with a monumental decision. The great European powers, the Austrians, the French, circled, waiting to pick the carcass of Tuscany clean, to loot the immense artistic and cultural treasure the Medici had accumulated over 4 centuries. But Anna Maria Luisa made a final, defiant act. She drafted the Family Pact, a legal instrument that decreed the Medici's vast collection of art, jewels, and libraries could never be removed from Florence. It was her penance. She was locking the door on the palace of her ancestors, ensuring that the beautiful, terrible fruits of their bargain would remain in their city of origin, a monument and a warning. On her deathbed in 1743, it is said she whispered not a prayer to God, but an apology to the city she loved. She was the last keeper of the secret, the one who chose to end the story rather than let the darkness find a new vessel. For over 2 centuries, the true story of the Medici was buried. Their legacy was sanitized by historians who credited their rise to banking acumen and patronage. But the clues were always there, hidden in plain sight, for those with the eyes to see. In the secret passages of the Palazzo Pitti, where strange symbols are carved into the stone behind the walls. In the accounts of exorcisms performed in the Boboli Gardens. In the private diaries of courtiers who wrote of cold spots in the Palazzo Vecchio and whispers that echoed from empty rooms. Modern scholars, delving into the family's encrypted correspondence, have found repeated references to a silent partner, a gran maestro, or the shadow in the ledger. These were not metaphors for business associates. They were code names for the third party in all their transactions. The most damning evidence may lie within the Vatican secret archives, in a sealed folio known as Clement Totun's Confession, a document so explosive that every pope since its deposition has refused to allow its viewing. It is believed to be the deathbed confession of the last Medici pope, detailing the true nature of his family's ascent and his own terrible knowledge of the price that was paid. So, what was the nature of the entity the Medici bargained with? Was it the Christian devil? A pagan god? Or something else? An amoral force of nature that thrives on ambition and chaos? The rituals, the symbology, the focus on blood and knowledge suggest a synthesis. The Medici, in their boundless ambition, did not merely sell their souls. They engaged a primordial engine of power, one that predates any human religion. They learned to channel it through the aesthetics of the Renaissance, the politics of the Papacy, and the brutality of war. They were not devil worshippers in the simplistic sense. They were practitioners of a high-stakes cosmic realpolitik. They offered the world a new vision of humanity, the Renaissance man, master of art, science, and politics. But this vision was powered by a source that fundamentally denied the humanity it exalted. Their story is the ultimate cautionary tale about the cost of power and the dangerous allure of wanting to shape destiny itself. The beauty of Botticelli's Primavera and the horror of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre are two sides of the same infernal coin. The echoes of the Medici Pact did not die with Anna Maria Luisa. The template they created, the fusion of immense wealth, political influence, and occult knowledge, became a blueprint for other powerful families and secret societies. The Bavarian Illuminati, the Rothschild banking dynasty, even certain strands of Freemasonry, all emerged in the centuries following the Medici's peak, and all have been shadowed by rumors of esoteric practices and unseen influence. Did they discover the Medici's secret? Or were they perhaps approached by the same eternal, whispering presence that first visited Cosimo in his hour of need? The patterns are uncanny. The rise from obscurity, the manipulation of world events from behind the scenes, the strange symbology embedded in their art and architecture. The Medici were the prototype, the first and most successful experiment in a form of power that operates just beyond the sight of conventional history. Their legacy is not just the art in the Uffizi Gallery. It is the very architecture of the modern world of power, a world where the real transactions are never recorded in any ledger the public is allowed to see. Tonight, as you walk the streets of Florence, a city that still breathes with the spirit of the Renaissance, remember what lies beneath the beauty. The shadow of the Medici is long. It falls across the Ponte Vecchio, lingers in the hall of the Palazzo Vecchio and whispers from the tomb in the Cappelle Medici. Their story forces us to ask a terrifying question. How much of our celebrated history, our art, our culture was built not on genius and faith, but on a foundation of damned ambition? The next time you admire a Michelangelo sculpture or a Leonardo painting, consider the hidden current of power that funded its creation. The Medici show us that history has a secret text, written in blood and fire, and that the most powerful families are often those with the most terrible secrets. The truth has been waiting, patient as stone, for its moment to be revealed. This has been a presentation for those who seek the truths hidden in the shadows of time. The story of the Medici is a stark reminder that the past is not a simple record, but a living, breathing entity with secrets that can still shock us today. Our journey into the hidden histories of Europe's elite has only just begun. What other lies are woven into the tapestry of our world? What other pacts were made in darkened chambers that shaped the fate of nations? To continue this exploration, to dare to uncover more, you must join us. Subscribe to History One. Click the notification bell. The next revelation is even more shocking than the last. Until then, remember, history is not what you've been told.